My name's Raine, despite what my presentation says, so I can tell I've hijacked that from a previous presentation. So yeah, Raine, I work at the National Chemical Emergency Centre, and I'm here today to talk to you about poison centres and what the emerging landscape looks like for poison centre registrations as we move forward. So we've seen the new draft regulations, and we have a reasonable idea as to what the final regulations are going to look like. And just last month we have seen that all of the member states have agreed upon having a harmonised approach for poison centres. So that's what the future will bring us, but what I want to do is discuss where we currently are with the current landscape as we sit. So we'll look at the existing poison centre landscape. We'll discuss Article 45 of CLP, and we'll look at the difference between the different member states. Then we'll look at how REACH Annex 2 ties into the CLP regulations from a poison centre point of view. And then we will look specifically at the use of the official appointed bodies for poison centres. Then as we move through the presentation, we'll have a good look at France and Germany. They're the two countries that I've specifically picked out for the purposes of looking at in a bit more detail today. And then we'll look at Annex 8 of CLP, these new regulations that we're anticipating over the coming weeks and months. So we have two pieces of legislation which concern the poison centres. We have Article 45 of CLP, and then we have REACH Annex 2, and both are equally relevant when it comes to poison centres. So Article 45 of CLP places that obligation on individual member states to appoint an official advisory body, i.e. a poison centre, that's responsible for receiving the information that we hold on our preparations and mixtures. This is specifically to detail the dangerous and hazardous components of those mixtures. So this information is then transmitted to the various poison centres, where they'll hold this information on these acute health emergencies that have that potential to be occurring. So the problem that we have at the moment in the current landscape is that this legislation is exceptionally vague, and each member state as a result has either interpreted the regulations in their own way or has chosen to implement their own practices as to how they want to move forward with the poison centres. So at the moment, what information needs to be provided? Well, at the moment we see poison centres requesting copies of safety data sheets, full product compositions, including specific percentages in some cases with some of the poison centres rather than ranges. They'd like copies of the product labelling. They'd like information on the precautionary measures and information on the instructions for uses. And then there are some other member states that are asking for additional information on top, but this is kind of the bulk across all of the different member states. So mixtures need to be registered, and how do we know how hazardous things need to be when it comes to registration? So we have various products within the supply chain that are for consumer or for industrial use. Are the products sold or used in various different member states? There are requirements on tonnage stipulations as well, so how much do you import into that particular member state? And we have a variety of different cases where we have full submissions that are required, part submissions that are required. Some member states would like to have the inclusion of environmentally hazardous information, whereas others are just interested in the physical and the health hazards. And then we have some countries that are currently mandatory submissions, and we have others that are currently voluntary. So various different ways that these bodies are receiving information. You know, who do you send them to? Do you send it to the appointed body or the poison centre itself? Do you send it in an electronic format? Is paper format okay? Is it okay to do each individual mixture on their own, or can you do a bulk submission? Lots of various different questions around the submissions. And in a nutshell, it depends. As with every piece of legislation, you know, it depends. So it depends upon the member state where you're placing products on the market, and there are different requirements for different member states. So we can see here that we've given you 4 examples where we have the United Kingdom, Netherlands, Germany, France and Spain, and the different levels of requirements. So the UK is the most simplest, if you like. A simple email would quite easily suffice. So it's fine to just put all your safety data sheets on an attachment, on an email, send it through. No additional costs, no registration fees, and no complicated process to be following. Whereas when we look across at the other countries, we can see that we have some that require to be charged for that privilege, that registration. So we can see that Spain has a submission fee of €30 per submission. We have others that are currently free, and again, it depends upon the format that you wish to be submitting them in. So this is just a snapshot of each of the different member states. We do on our website have a report that has more detailed information right across all the different member states. So we have further additional requirements that are in place for the rest of the member states. So if we just have a quick look at France. Did I skip a slide then? So if we have a quick look at France, we've got a staged implementation. However, we're seeing this changing on quite a regular basis. So the deadline has already been extended. We had a deadline originally for submitting information to the French poison centres of 2014, where the French Public Health Code was going to impose a fine of up to sort of €3,750,000. But we've since seen this legislation deadline be extended. Partly because we haven't had the full regulations out, but partly because people still hadn't quite gotten around with the processes, but also partly because I don't think the French Poison Centre was quite prepared for the number and the volume of submissions that they were going to be handling, and therefore they couldn't process them in time. So there's a combination as to why this was delayed. So there's no cost to the submission to France. However, the French have a registration via their preferred web portal that they want to be doing. But it can be quite a time-consuming and costly process. So there's a nominated person and a registration certificate that's required for France. So the company, or your company in effect, would need to be on a French company register. So your company's nominated individual is then able to submit the information to the French Poison Centre. And then, of course, there's this requirement for the French Poison Centre number to be put onto safety data sheets in order to be compliant within the French market. That's nothing new. That's something we've had in existence for many years. So Article 45 has led to a huge variation in the submission process. You know, what information do you need? When do you need to submit it? When do you need to provide it by? And the majority of that data burden is currently on industry, but the poison centres are also having difficulties too with this data submission process. Spain's another example of this. They originally wanted all of their products to be registered by the 1st of June 2015, but they couldn't handle the volume of all of the submissions, and very, very late, I believe late in May, they actually changed the deadline. So if you've got all of your information and you've looked at all the differences between the different member states, how do users then access the information that you have provided to the poison centres in the case of a poisoning? So having the phone numbers on the SDSAs brings us along to our next complexity with the poison centres. We don't have a definition of what an official advisory body is and whether a country actually has to physically have one. A lot of the official advisory bodies are in effect the poison centres, but being a poison centre doesn't automatically mean that you're an official advisory body, so it's a bit of a catch-22 as to what you become. If the country does nominate an official advisory body that must use their number on a safety data sheet, then you're sending that product into the market. It's worth pointing out here that the poison centres will only deal with health emergencies, so they won't be dealing with any transport in problems or reactions or fires. This is purely around the health complications. So how do you then get your number onto your safety data sheet? So you've provided all of the information. Your product might not need a notification under Article 45. You don't necessarily meet all of the criteria for having to register, but you would still like to have that phone number on your safety data sheets. That might be out of best practice, or it might be because your suppliers are insisting that you have that number appearing on the safety data sheets. You know, we've all been in the situation before where it might not necessarily tick the box from a legal compliant point of view, but you get pressure from your customers. So just because you want to have that number on your safety data sheet doesn't make it quite straightforward as that. So you would have to supply all of the information to the member states, and you would need to find out if the country has an official advisory body. And then you can then find the information on the ECA website on the list of all the help desks. And you can speak to the member state REACH help desk, and then they will give you permission to have that onto to have that phone number appear on your safety data sheet. So this is the Dutch poison centre, and if you've placed this number onto your safety data sheet, the question is, can everybody call it? And this isn't necessarily the case with this poison centre. So the Netherlands is very similar to the way that the UK poison centre is set up, in that it can only be used by medical professionals, so it cannot currently be called by members of the public. So very similar to the UK, in that you and I don't personally have access to the poison centres. It's only for medical, and in the UK, veterinary professionals that can access it. This is very different from the German poison centre. So in Germany, the attitude is very much that poison centres should be readily available to members of public, that's what it's there for. It's for the worried parents, the worried pet owners that have had animals and children that have consumed different products. So they are very much of the attitude that the phone number should be readily available by all members of the public. So Germany is again unique in the fact that we have 8 poison centres within Germany, but we don't have an official advisory body within Germany. So again, we're not quite ticking with consistency across all the different member states. So information needs to be provided to the BFR, and the BFR will then disseminate the information down to the relevant different poison centres. And then in the case of a poisoning by somebody within that member state, then they can call the phone number on the safety data sheet and get information via the poison centres. It's worth pointing out here as well that under Annex 2, under REACH, you don't have an obligation to put all of the poison centre numbers on your safety data sheet. So REACH is very specific in the fact that you must have a phone number in section 1.4 of your safety data sheet. It doesn't have to be 24 hours a day, as long as you stipulate the hours of the hours that phone number is in operation, but there's no requirement to then list all of the different poison centres, and that's again something that's causing a lot of uncertainty within industry. There is a different piece of German legislation, however, that does require for there to be a 24-hour phone number for medical advice. So not for transport incidents, specifically for medical advice, and that's where this system comes in play. So you have 3 options in effect for providing this 24-hour number. You can have it in-house if you've got staff in-house that are capable of doing it. You can subcontract this service, or you can be using the poison centres in order to meet that provision of the German poison centres. So it's also worth I've skipped one there. How do I go back, this one? Okay, so in summary, what is an official advisory body? Well, the jury's still out on that one. We haven't quite determined or come up with a definition as to what an official advisory body is. So we're expecting to see that in some of the technical guidance that follows the Poison Centre's submissions. Just because you've carried out a registration doesn't necessarily mean that you are guaranteed to access this number. So we haven't discussed Poland or Slovenia yet, but there is no provision of a phone number. So you make your submissions to Poland and Slovenia, and you've ticked the requirement box for those submissions. You're then not handed an emergency phone number to put onto your safety data sheets. Then there's the additional complication that just because you have carried out a submission and that you have that phone number on there, it doesn't necessarily mean that your end users can be using it. So if we remember, the Dutch and the UK will not allow access to the members of the public. And then not forgetting that we're just for health response on its own. So we'll have a little look at France again. If we go back to France, and we'll look at the registration process in a little bit more detail. So France is very specific in the requirements that it wants for submission. Their website is very detailed, their guidance is very detailed. They're actually very good at communicating. If you want to pick up the phone or drop them an email, they're exceptionally helpful. They have listed the requirements here for the submission, so the SDS, the composition, the physical properties, and the product labelling. But you need to have what's called a siren number, or a SIRET number. And so this is your unique French company identifier. It's normally a 9-digit number that is requested by all French administration. And it's proof that you're fully registered within France. Once you've registered the business with the Chambre de Commerce, then you will get your 9-digit number that can then be used. This is an example of the French web portal. So there are many various different pre-registration stages that need to be used when carrying out your registrations. So you must also purchase an RGS certificate as well, which has an added complication of only being able to be supplied to a specific person in France after you've had an identification check being carried out. So I'm in the process of getting one for myself, which means that I physically need to go to France in order to meet somebody, in order for it to be personally handed over to me once I've had a full identification check carried out. So it's not something that is just handed to you. It's quite a laborious process, especially if you have no plans to go to France anyway. So that can be an added complication. And of course there's a cost implication that goes with that as well. So I have a quick look at Germany now, just to show the differences. So Germany very much is of the attitude that you either register now or you wait till 2020. And it very much depends upon the types of products that you have as to which you do. So if you have industrial products and you're opting for the reduced submission requirements with the 24-hour emergency number, then the waiting till 2020 option may well suit you best. However, if you have a huge number of consumer products, then it's best to register now, because we're anticipating that it will be much more prescriptive and much more of a difficult process moving forward. So I urge you, if you're placing things on the market in Germany and it's a consumer user, to really seriously think about doing Poison Centre registrations now rather than 2020. I think it will just be a much easier process than stalling and waiting. So So as with the French, there's a requirement to have a company code. So you get a company code by filling out a form. You need to have 3 nominated emergency contacts on them, and you need to have information on your out of hours for emergencies. If you have an emergency response centre, then that number is fine to be using. And then you're required to have this information on each one of your different mixtures that you intend to be registering. And then we have an XML file that needs to be filled in. So it's a standard template that needs to be filled in and so submitted in the format as defined by the German member state. And then this is then emailed to the BFR, who will then, if you remember the slide that we had that showed that the BFR then disseminates that down to the 9 different poison centres. So we had a draft copy of the regulations come out in February time, and there were a number of anticipated outcomes where we were hoping to see harmonisation across all of the different member states for the different submissions. And just last month in September, on the 21st, we saw that the member states had all voted and have agreed to go for harmonisation. So we haven't seen the final regulations come out in print. We wait with excitement as to what they will actually hold. Or dread, yes, indeed. So there was a lack of consistency in the interpretation of the legislation, which is why we've seen businesses take multiple different submissions to multiple different member states with lots of very, very similar information. So the French and the Germans are asking for very similar information. But in spite of this, we've seen 40% of cases where the poison centres were providing advice on the wrong product. So we've seen risks in health and causing unnecessary hospital submissions. Additionally, we've also found that the poison centres from industrial products from industrial sites made up a small amount of the incidents that we were seeing from poison centres. So by seeing the harmonisation of all of these submissions, we're hoping for a lot more consistency, effectiveness, cost savings, but more importantly, life saving as we move forward. So what do we have in the way of submission changes? So there's a base level of information that is now required. So if you have, we also now need to have information on your non-hazardous components if they're in over 1% of the overall mixture. We also need to inform the poison centres as part of the submission, the sizes and the types of packaging that you're placing into that member state. And we will also have to see an allocation of product categorisation code, which is likely to be similar to the REACH codes that we see. And this product categorisation code is different from the unique formula identification that we're planning to see these UFIs that will be created. So we still don't have the product categorisation code in place, and we're expecting to see that soon. In addition to all of this information, we are also expecting to see more information that's required by member states on the different synonyms of your products, VAT numbers, and the overall intended uses that are likely to be used with these products as well. So we have a template for these submissions that are likely to be there for group submissions. And they all have, and for group submissions, the mixtures all have to have similar types of hazards. So group submissions doesn't mean take all of your products and do a bulk submission. Group submissions will only be for those that have similar hazards. So it's likely to be different products of varying levels of concentrations. So the ability to do the group submissions is likely to reduce the volume of individual submissions that we're likely to see, and hopefully have less of an impact and less of a burden on industry. But we still don't have a centralised receiving body, and there is discussion around having a central place for these to be submitted to, rather than to each individual member state. So we come on to the unique formula identifier. So it's now being known by our usual acronyms that we come across. So this is our UFI. And this is going to be required on all product packaging in order to make the identification of that particular product much easier once it's been registered with the poison centres. So it's come about because we've had a number of poisonings where the information wasn't given correctly on that particular poison, and we've had people that were hospitalised when they shouldn't have been, and unfortunately we've had it the other way around where people weren't hospitalised when they should have been. So there was a lot of uncertainty as to why that advice was given incorrectly, and determining which product was at the heart of the problems was seen to be one of them. So that's why this unique formula identifier has been introduced. So it is generated via a web portal, and you need your company's VAT number and a new internal code for the mixture, and then the web portal will generate your UFI. So the UFIs are going to be managed by the European Commission. They will bear the cost of pulling together this database and having the information available. But there is a significant cost to industry as well, because there is a need to be updating all of your packaging in order to be able to have that on there. So there's going to be lots of labels that will need to be redesigned, plus there's the additional printing and how they will go, where they will be situated. So yes, certainly an additional cost to industry coming. So one of the biggest concerns by industry was data protection. So providing information to member states on each of the mixtures compositions is very specific competitor information. So it was deemed very, very important that the upcoming requirement took into account the protection of intellectual property moving forwards. So if you have a non-hazardous component and it's less than 10% and it's not classified as being hazardous for health or physical, then it's permissible to have an umbrella term such as fragrances and colouring agents. So that gives everybody a little bit of protection by having this grouping. But in order to apply with those stipulations, you must be complying with Article 24 of CLP, which is proving that an IUPAC name would commercially harm the business, particularly its intellectual property. So if you want to comply with this term, then it may well be something that can be used within your submission as well. So this is where we currently stand with the ranges. We don't actually know what the final regulations are going to say. There was a lot of conversation around ranges from all of the various different trade associations. So CEFIC were very interested in this, as were the flavours and fragrances, because they wanted the ranges to be more suitable and more convenient and less of a cost burden on industry. So this is where we currently have. We currently have a bit of clarification. You must declare your hazardous components if they're present in concentrations that are equal or higher than the 0.1%. But many different products can have these formulation tweaks over its lifetime, and therefore there's a need to have a range in order to help with your submissions. So now you need to submit all of your components that are non-hazardous if above 1%. the threshold values have been introduced for resubmission. So these values are also applicable to hazardous components that have not met the classification on the previous slides. I will look now at some changes to scope and exemptions. So mixtures that are used for R&D purposes, research and development, are no longer eligible for submission under Article 45 of CLP. So I believe this came about due to a more stringent definition of the market. So you could be moving a research and development drug from one site to another, and that was technically seen as placing it on the market, even though it was within your companies. So it's no longer eligible for submission because it's staying within your company. Neither are gases. Gases, assuming that the sole hazard they have is being gases under pressure. So if you have a gas that is toxic or corrosive, then it still falls under the regulations and will still need to be required. But if you purely have a gas that's gases under pressure, then they still need to be registered. Unstable explosives and anything that falls into Transport Divisions 1.1 through to 1.6 also fall out of scope. And then there are a number of things that are listed from Article 1 that already have an existing exemption. So radioactive materials, medical devices, feedstock for animals are all likely to be covered by other regulations as they currently are, so they're not likely to fall under the CLP. So finally, we're moving on to the reduced submission for industrial products. So it's been a big welcome from industry. So those that are putting industrial chemicals on industrial sites, we see very few poisonings that happen within industry. It's normally consumers, end users that have these accidents, and therefore there is an option to have a reduced submission for industrial products. So to be eligible for that, you simply need to have a 24-hour emergency phone number. So an SES is provided, but a 24-hour number must be provided for additional information as well. So it can be quite a cost-effective solution if you have thousands of safety data sheets. So it would just mean that you wouldn't need to be doing the full-blown submissions, doing the XML files, contacting each of the separate independent member states. It's literally just a case of an SDS and a 24-hour phone number. The UFI is, however, still needed if it's placed on the safety data sheet. So removal of the 30-day grace period. So an information package must be provided before it's placed on the market, not as we had previously seen where you had the 30-day grace period, so you could put it on the market and do it within 30 days. So if you want to be expanding into a new market, you need to think about the collection of the data, having your product labels, having your safety data sheet, having your UFI, and having your submission to your poison centres done before you place it on the market. So our registration timeline, so this slide is relatively self-explanatory in that our first deadline is applicable to consumer mixtures, and that's going to be in July of 2020, and then moving through to 2021, 2024 and 2025. So the current state of play, it's worth just having a quick look at the financial implications that are likely to be imposed to companies. So we have carried out a very approximate cost on 24 member states based upon the current fee structure. So it's likely that the fee structure will still continue to vary with harmonisation, but we're still not entirely sure as to how that will work. But if we said that we had 24 states and 6 of the member states have not provided information on their fees, so they'll only do that when you actually submit your application. What we don't know is whether or not it's a standard fee, or whether or not it varies from submission to submission. You know, is it based upon the number of safety data sheets you have? Is it likely to be based upon the company size, company turnover? We're a little bit unclear on that, but we have 6 that are not publicly sharing that information on registration costs. It's very much a price upon application. Malta and Liechtenstein are excluded because we still don't have an appointed body in place. So we've done some calculations based upon 10 products into 22 member states, and you can see that it's going to be a cost of just short of €4,000 versus somebody that has 1,000 products that's hitting closer to the €136,000. €100,000, I should say. So Belgium and Luxembourg have a flat rate of €200 per product. So if you had 1,000 products that you're replacing on the market in Belgium, then that's quite a substantial increase in your costs. So also within this one-off fee structure, there are 3 countries, Ireland, Finland and Norway, that have an annual retainer as well. So they would expect you to pay per product, and then you would pay every year to keep that product on file. So you don't have a one-off cost, you've got an annual cost that needs to be paid as you're moving through. So it can be very difficult to judge what the poison centre submissions are going to be, because there are so many differing variables as each submission is carried out. And not forgetting that some of the countries are also free with their submissions as well. But it's likely to be a significant cost. We have some information that is freely available on our website that details more information on the poison centres. So we have a document that lists each of the different member states, who the poison centre is, the website for the poison centre, contact telephone number. And we also have a much more detailed compliance report that goes into each of the submission processes for each of the poison centres. So the way I've shared that information on France and Germany, the fact that you need the XML files or you're using the website, it details far more detailed information on each of the member states and how to contact them. So if anybody would like to have a copy of the free report, please feel free to let me know, or you can go onto our website and download that information. So I just want to finish up by saying that the member state implementation is very much rapidly changing. We are anticipating more changes when we see the final regulations. We don't know how well some of these member states are going to be able to cope with these changes, not forgetting that they're quite newly set up companies anyway, and therefore we're not quite too sure how things will adapt and move forward. But we're likely to see that the changes will accelerate the process, so it will make the process much easier for industry. There will be less of a burden. The harmonisation should bring everything back into place, and we should find that there is a much less of a financial burden on industry as well moving forward. We are, however, expecting there to be a lot more of an increase on the legislation compliance point of view, though. So we're expecting to see more of the member states checking up on companies to make sure that they are registered within that country. And of course, there's always the issue of the corporate responsibility and making sure that you're maintaining your business continuity and security and commercial success moving forward. So finally, does anybody have any questions?
Let's start by thanking Caroline. Secondly, does anybody else feel like screaming? Yeah. I'm sure we've got plenty of questions. Lena, you've got your hand raised, so.
mentioned that the product solely for industrial use.
Yes.
You just need to provide a safety data sheet and 24-hour emergency telephone. Is that regardless if it's UK or Germany or France?
Yeah, so the first key area of uncertainty that we have once again is that we don't have a definition of what an industrial site is. So I know what I think an industrial site is, and you probably all know what an industrial site is, but I'm not sure if we'll all match up, and I'm not sure if the regs will match up. So that's our first problem, that we need an industrial site defined. But then, yes, that is the same right across all of the different member states. Yes. Yep. Lorna?
Lorna?
You said about the UFI, and it's generated by a web portal or by companies' VAT number.
Yes.
Although it's unlikely, in the UK, if you're below a certain threshold, you don't have a VAT number, you don't have to be VAT registered. How will they deal with that?
Yeah, so I don't know the answer to that question either. So it's something that has been flagged up by industry. We believe that there's a possibility of it going with a company code rather than a VAT number, but we're not entirely certain. But I suspect it'll end up being a company code.
Just on the topic of UFIs, is it resolved yet where the UFI has to appear?
No.
So we still don't know whether it has to be in the CLP label or on every layer of packaging? Or
So again, uncertainty around that. There was a lot of discussion about having it included on the product label because then it's near the hazard pictograms and therefore it's readily available. But then there were others that were suggesting that it should be on every layer of packaging so that you can see where you're at. And we haven't had that information defined yet
so
either.
it's still not agreed.
No. Well, not to my knowledge anyway.
Was I naive in thinking that harmonisation meant it was all going to be the same?
I think we were all rather naive in that, yes.
Right. But does that mean though, because normally with things like harmonisation it ends up being the worst case, doesn't it? Where everything's included, so you have to do that to comply with everything. Does that mean then that the simple system that we have in the UK is going to be allowed to continue, or are we going to have to become more complicated?
I suspect that we will have to be more open to receiving information in the XML type file format. So I think there's a massive investment that will be needed by the UK Poison Centre.
Right. James, that's what you've got in.
Yeah, and given that it's a lot of unknowns, how many fines have actually gone through at present? Do you know?
So I have been speaking to a number of different companies that have had very difficult and awkward conversations in both Spain and Italy, more around safety data sheets rather than the actual Poison Centre submissions. But given that the Spanish have extended their registrations, they're reminding and slapping people on the wrists rather than actually enforcing fines. But I did hear of a company that ended up with a fine. It wasn't a massive amount of money in Italy, and they're the only ones that I'm aware of. I think it's too early days in order to be enforcing fines, especially when we don't actually have a piece of legislation that defines what we should specifically be doing. Has anybody done any registrations yet? No? Does anybody have plans to do them soon, or are you all waiting for the regulations to come out? You're all waiting. In the hope that they go away, or the hope that it'll be easier?
I think we're all still playing catch up for the last set of
That's right.
legislation.
Yeah.
Is there any indication of when the legislation is going to be printed?
So we were told autumn, which we're currently in, I believe. But we've had it agreed, the harmonised approach, and I believe that everything is in place. So you would like to see it soon, yes.
Can't we hold a referendum on it?
Sadly, no. Stuart, you had a question.
Yeah. Is there any reason why the SDS isn't enough information on its own, as it currently is in the UK, for the German system? Why do we need to specify the individual components and their amounts?
As in pulling it all together in the XML file, is that what you mean? Yeah, so I think it's it's just the format that they've agreed to pull it all in place is that they've got this XML file, which I assume then links into their databases, which means that they can have that information all sat in there in a reasonable format. But you're right, a lot of the information is available on the safety data sheets. Information on quantities isn't, and of course, so you can get the labelling elements, you can get your composition, but there are other additional pieces of information that some member states are requesting. I think it all comes down to a format, and I think that with a safety data sheet, it requires that manual entry, whereas with an XML file, it must build into whatever databases the poison centres have. I think it's about the sending and receiving of information and the holding of it and making it searchable.
Is there any thought process going forward if there is a registration in a particular poison centre, say in Germany, where we would more than likely be starting this, for the poison centres to share that information, or do we have to register in each individual country?
So at the moment we have to register in each individual member state, and I believe that will be the way that it will be forced moving forwards. I think the reasoning behind that is that the European Commission didn't want to have a central database like the REACH IT system for REACH or the classification and labelling inventory. They didn't want to have that cost burden of having a central location. So our only option really is if all the member states decide to get together and have that conversation and contribute to it, which, yeah, is
That could take
not
forever
likely.
as well, couldn't it?
But it's because the Commission won't take that cost burden that each member state is doing their own thing.
Just a word on the product categorisation system. VARSA through FICA and through CEFIC have been quite active in trying to keep the system, the product categorisation system, as simple as possible for adhesives, sealants and primers. And I think from the last communication that we've been relatively successful in that.
And in line with the REACH codes
Yes.
as well, yes?
Yeah.
Good.
So if anybody wants to see that, I think it's on the Health and Safety website, but I might not be sure. I might not be confident about it. Yeah. On our Health and Safety webpage, I mean. In that. Any further questions for Caroline?
I have one further, if I may.
Yes, please.
How do people plan to deal with the poison centre registrations? Is it a resource that you're likely to have in-house, or is it something that you'll be subcontracting out, or is it too early to even start stressing about it? And my other final question is, what kind of support do you need moving forwards with the poison centres? Where are you hearing about poison centres? Just here, yeah.
Mainly
So it'd be
through
helpful
VARSA, really.
once the regulations are out for me to send you some kind of updated document.
It certainly would, Caroline.
Good, okay.
I think like most of these things, it's going to end up in the overworked technical department that hasn't got the resource to deal with it anyway.
Yeah.
So I suspect there is going to be quite a demand for help.
Okay, good.
But then much different.
Good, then I shall leave you to
Okay,
it.
Caroline, thank you very much.
Okay.